Xi Jinping has taken a veiled swipe at Donald Trump in his meeting with Ireland's Prime Minister. He said, "The world today is undergoing changes and turbulence not seen in a century, with unilateral acts of hegemony severely undermining the international order. It comes after other Chinese criticism of the US attack on Venezuela." Watch.
中方对于美方悍然对一个主权国家使用武力，并对一国总统动手，深表震惊，予以强烈谴责。美方的这种霸权行径严重违反国际法，侵犯委内瑞拉主权，威胁拉美和加勒比地区和平与安全，中方坚决反对。
Operation Absolute Resolve to remove Nicolás Maduro from power involved more than 150 aircraft, US Special Forces, cyber operations, and, quote, overwhelming force. Those aircraft and drones launched from about 20 bases and warships, quote, across the Western Hemisphere, including F-22s, F-35s, F-18 fighters, and B-1 bombers. Here's Donald Trump.
At my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history.
Observers have been quick to say this sets up a precedent for China and its ambitions over Taiwan. But does it? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Khvat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Michael Turton, Taipei Times columnist from the Philippines, and Ronan Fu, Academia Sinica Institute of Political Science Assistant Research Fellow, as well as Guermantes Lailari, retired US Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. A very warm welcome to you both in the studio, and also Michael joining us from the Philippines. Many are speculating the events in Venezuela give a green light to Chinese President Xi Jinping over Taiwan. The Straits Times reported it was the top topic trending on Chinese social media site Weibo on Saturday, with more than 440 million views. The report said Chinese drew a comparison with Taiwan, with one user posting, "I suggest using the same method to reclaim Taiwan in the future." Jeffrey Robertson, former president of the UN War Crimes Court in Sierra Leone, told The Guardian that, quote, "the most obvious consequence is that China will take the opportunity to invade Taiwan." So, Michael, just bringing you in from the Philippines, let me start with you. Let me put the question to you. Does this US attack justify or accelerate a Xi Jinping attack on Taiwan?
I don't think it justifies or accelerates or gives a green light, or all of those takes are bad takes.
Why is that, given that, US's policy on China and Taiwan is basically fundamentally based on no use of force by keeping the status quo?
Well, first of all, the PRC has never placed Taiwan under international law, because international law says Taiwan's status is unresolved. And there are various other things from international law, such as UN agreements on decolonization, that could apply here. So the PRC has carefully avoided that. What it's done instead is use the kind of lawfare to construct an alternative narrative based on the Cairo Declaration, Potsdam, Japanese instrument of surrender, all these things. And if you want to talk about international law and precedents, the PRC already occupies two countries. They passed the anti-secession law in 2006, which announced their intention to kill Taiwanese if they attempted to live in an independent country. In 2024, you might remember they had a diplomat attempt to ram the vice president's vehicle while she was on a visit to Europe. So they're already well experienced in breaking international law. So they don't need a green light. The opposite of that point is also important. If you believe that the U.S. gave them a green light, you also believe that U.S. restraint was keeping them from attacking Taiwan, which is obviously absurd.
Okay, Guermantes, let me ask you, there's some analysts speaking to Reuters claiming that this could somehow strengthen China's claim over Taiwan, Tibet, even over the South China Sea.
So first of all, I don't believe that the activity that the U.S. did has anything to do with Taiwan other than making China weaker in the world, because Venezuela was one of their key assets that they were going to use against the United States should there be a war between Taiwan and China. So I see it as a positive move that reasserts U.S. involvement in the world, especially against countries that sponsor narco-terrorism and support autocratic regimes like Russia, China, Iran, that have malintent against the U.S. and other democracies.
But if the U.S. can decapitate the leader of another country through force, why can't China do the same thing to Taiwan?
Well, they want to. The last exercise talks about decapitation. That is their intent. But the thing is, they can't do it. They don't have the experience and they don't have the wherewithal to do it right now. And what they're doing instead is looking at what the U.S. did, because they've never done something like that, ever.
So you believe that, putting aside the argument of justification, you believe that the capability of China is not there. That is what's holding them back from any attack of Taiwan.
I think there's two things holding them back: capability, which you mentioned, and intent. Xi Jinping has to order them to go. And what he's done is he told them to be ready by 2027. So that's the capability. That's the goal of the PLA. But after that, it's up to him when they go.
Okay. Ronan, we're here in Taiwan. How are Taiwanese reacting to that? Let me just quote what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan is saying, that they're closely monitoring developments and will continue to work with the US and other democratic partners to promote regional and global security and stability. So how are Taiwanese reacting to this?
Yes, basically, we try to make sure that the focus will be on the humanitarian crisis and also the notion that the U.S. is trying to actually stabilize regional stability. And then the Taiwanese move also emphasizes this is very key, the smooth democratic transition within Venezuela. The reason for that is because we have to emphasize the democratic component followed by the U.S. actions. That's the key. That also suggests that, putting Taiwan and Venezuela in the same basket is not the right way to go. And in terms of how the Taiwanese civil society respond to that, basically it's divided. Some people worry that it suggests that the unpredictability of U.S. foreign policy, but some people actually, just like you mentioned, that it shows that the air defense zone the provider to Venezuela is actually China. But the U.S. was able to actually paralyze this system, within just a couple hours. It suggests the capability of the U.S., not the capability of China or PLA per se. Yeah.
Okay. Michael, bringing you back, Ronan said that Taiwan cannot be put in the same basket as Venezuela. How is Taiwan different to Venezuela?
Well, it's a democracy, and its leader was elected, unlike Maduro, who was not recognized by many nations around him. Maduro's renewable was very popular. Lies would not be. An attack on Taiwan would have a huge effect on the global balance of power. That would not happen, whatever happened to Venezuela.
Yeah, and also, there's also the issue of, the status quo here in the Taiwan Strait. This is decades old, 8 decades old, compared to Maduro taking power as 2013.
Yes, and the PRC has done this for 7 decades now. So Trump's actions won't affect that.
Okay. I mean, I want to pick up also on something that Ronan talked about, unpredictability, you know, this as perhaps as a Trump strategy. Some people thought that Xi Jinping would see this as a green light. What do you think? How does he view the situation now that they've seen this? And they admitted that they were shocked.
Well, first of all, I think Xi personally is a bit scared from the event because for several reasons. First of all, it gives people in China the notion or the idea that you can overthrow a dictator. It's a major problem for the CCP because they are a dictatorship. So that's the first problem. The second problem is how easy it was to do it. So I'm sure he's a bit scared these days and wondering about his own safety and the safety of the regime. And then I think autocratic regimes naturally are paranoid. And so when another autocratic regime gets taken out, it causes major problems in their network. And especially one that, as I mentioned before, is a prime supplier of oil. 80 or 90% of the oil coming out of Venezuela, which has the largest oil reserves in the world, goes to China illegally.
Ronan, but more broadly speaking, I mean, this is what some of the critics have said, that it's accelerating the slide away from a rules-based order to one where might is right, also, you know, sort of normalizing aggression if this comes from the United States. You know, is there a broader long-term effect?
Yeah, so I want to actually address this question through 2 points. Number one, so what the case of Venezuela demonstrate to China is the lack of capability to actually invade Taiwan this moment. I think that demonstrates that they are not ready. They know that. But in terms of the broader implications, obviously, if Venezuela is a democratic country, and I think the rule-based order is collapsing. Fortunately, it's an autocratic state, and it has a lot of problems. So basically, delving back to China, the reason why China's action against Taiwan won't be justifiable is because actually Taiwan is a democratic state, and our leader basically was elected through votes, and leaders' opinion have been demonstrated. Right, so that's the reason why, even if there's some domestic oppositions against some policy, but there's like disagreement over policy issues. We don't question Taiwan's sovereignty. We don't question the legitimacy of Dai Qingde, even if we may disagree with his policy. So it's totally different. So any event when China is trying to use force against Taiwan, this kind of action will be questioned and also highly contested throughout the entire world. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next question now. This is from the chairman of the U.S. House Select Committee on China, John Moulinar. The Trump administration's decisive action against Maduro removes a Chinese ally from power, makes the world a safer place. China's partnership with Maduro propped up an authoritarian ruler who worked with our nation's adversaries and hurt the American people. Trump goes further. Watch.
Furthermore, under the now deposed dictator Maduro, Venezuela was increasingly hosting foreign adversaries in our region and acquiring menacing offensive weapons that could threaten U.S. interests and lives. And they used those weapons last night.
Just days earlier, according to the U.S. government, documents obtained by the Washington Post and reported on December 31st, Maduro drafted a letter to Xi Jinping appealing for, quote, expanded military cooperation in the face of U.S. escalation. That included a request to expedite the production of radar systems by Chinese companies. In the letter, Maduro emphasized the seriousness of perceived U.S. aggression in the Caribbean, framing U.S. military action against Venezuela as action against China due to their shared ideology. The documents also noted Venezuela had sought military aircraft equipment and surface-to-air missiles from Russia, as well as drones from Iran. Now, while the Post did not say how China responded to Maduro's request, and Beijing denied providing, quote, offensive weapons to Venezuela, the Jamestown Foundation and other outlets note Venezuela may be using Chinese-made VN-18 infantry fighting vehicles, Type 05 amphibious assault vehicles and SH-16A howitzers, as well as surveillance systems and radars. Backing up the Jamestown report were media reports in August that Venezuela was negotiating with Beijing to buy 20 J-10 advanced fighter jets. Now, let's watch Trump again.
The United States military is the strongest and most fearsome military on the planet by far. With capabilities and skills our enemies can scarcely begin to imagine. We have the best equipment anywhere in the world. There's no equipment like what we have.
So, Michael, bringing you back in from the Philippines, what do you think was the message, if you can summarize, the message from Trump to Xi Jinping?
Obviously, Trump wants to convey the idea that the U.S. cannot be defeated in a war. I remember back in the 1990s when we sent carriers off the Philippines when the Chinese were shooting missiles at Taiwan, and they took that as a kind of motivation. So I wonder how they will respond to this.
Again, this was from Reuters. It was a Chinese government official who was briefed on the meeting between Maduro and China's special representative for Latin America. And he said to Reuters, apparently, it was a big blow to China. We wanted to look like a dependable friend to Venezuela. How badly does that reflect on China's sort of military ability or its security guarantees to its allies and partners?
Well, as we saw in the Iran example, China's attempt to send some weapons were useless. In the case of Pakistan, there were some wins and some losses. But in this case, there was no success. And so I think that is the main issue here, is the embarrassment, because the parade that happened in early September showing all their toys, if they can't counter what the U.S. does, they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
But also there's this other threat that reports say that Russia was going to sell the Oreshnik ballistic missile, our intermediate range ballistic missile, to Venezuela that could reach not only Florida, but Washington, D.C. And this reminds me of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And those warheads could have lots of different things on them. So I think it's another reason why the United States took the opportunity to take out Maduro, because of this potential Cuban missile scenario.
So that's what Trump meant by those comments?
Yes.
I mean, you talked about how China is weaker, but let's now talk about the operation itself. So I want to quote, we heard there Donald Trump said that the U.S. is the most fearsome military on the planet. General Dan Kane, he said the word integration does not explain the sheer complexity of such a mission. Why is it? Why are they saying only the U.S. military could have achieved this?
Well, unfortunately or fortunately, the United States has been at war for the last 250 years. And so that means that there's a lot of experience in our military compared to China, which really fought their real war in the Korean War. The Indian War and the war against Vietnam were only a few weeks long. So they've never done anything like the U.S. has done. And the U.S., one of the main aspects that the Chinese can't do well, they can engineer and copy weapon systems, but they can't engineer and copy the U.S. military mindset of unity of effort, mission command, synchronization. All these things are very uniquely American and Western. And you can't engineer this. This is something you have to get trained in, experience, trained again, and experience.
And so, Ronan, a point that you picked up, you also said that the conclusion must be from Xi Jinping that China's not ready. Do you actually think that this event has pushed back perhaps any date that Xi Jinping may have had for any possible contingency in Taiwan?
Yeah, at least, 2027 is out of the table. No way. Yeah, so they know that basically, like I mentioned, it demonstrates the power of the United States. It also demonstrates, basically the underdevelopment of the Chinese systems and arms.
So in particular, if you could.
Yeah. So if I were to actually just pinpoint on one thing, the air defense system, that's the key. And remember that Taiwan actually, through the help from the U.S., actually we are going to have a U.S.-aided, U.S. based system.
The T-dome.
Yeah, the T-dome. Yeah. So that is actually put Taiwan in a very, very relatively safer position compared to Venezuela. Right. So if I were actually to draw some implication for some other authoritarian leaders, the lesson that they can potentially draw on is actually this: China can help you survive sanctions, but it cannot help you survive American airstrikes and things like that.
So it can provide an economic lifeline, but nothing else.
Nothing else. Yeah.
Right. Okay, Jiman, I want to come to sort of the lessons learned from China, not just which is the main one that Ronan spoke about, that they're not ready. But what is it that they could be picking up from the US in terms of its skill and expertise?
The skill and expertise of the US in this case is very much like a counterterrorism operation where they're going after one person. In some cases, they're saving somebody. In some cases, they're assassinating somebody like Osama bin Laden. And over the last 20 years, the US has done this, honed this skill very well. And it's not something that the PLA has done. First of all, you have to know what's going on the ground, in the air, in space, in cyber. They shut down not only the radars, but they shut down the power grid. They made sure that no one could see them. They had supporting fires in the air, on the ground, and so they were well protected.
Okay. Now, while many focus on a supposed parallel between Venezuela and Taiwan, it won't have escaped Beijing's attention. There are correlations between Venezuela and China. Take a listen.
The illegitimate dictator Maduro was the kingpin of a vast criminal network responsible for trafficking colossal amounts of deadly and illicit drugs into the United States. As alleged in the indictment, he personally oversaw the vicious cartel known as Cartel de las Solas, which flooded our nation with lethal poison, responsible for the deaths of countless Americans, the many, many Americans. Hundreds of thousands over the years of Americans died because of him.
Now, in the past, Trump has also accused Beijing of killing hundreds of thousands of Americans through fentanyl-related overdoses, with this opioids precursors originating in China. And since the earliest days of the PRC in 1949, Beijing believed that the US sought regime change in China, in large part due to US support for Chiang Kai-shek and his ROC forces. In the decades that followed, Washington sought to contain the USSR, ending in the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, with the US actively involved in Eastern Europe's transitions. Since Maduro first gained power in 2013 in Venezuela, an estimated 8 million Venezuelans, these that we're showing are in Spain, have left the country. In an August poll by London-based research firm Pantera, 63% of Venezuelans said that Maduro was not the legitimate leader of their country after a July 2024 election widely believed to be rigged. And a recent Wall Street Journal survey found that 64% of Venezuelans living abroad supported a US military intervention in their country, although only 34% of those living within Venezuela said the same. So let's bring Michael back from the Philippines. Michael, it's never been official US policy to seek regime change in China. So why do you think Beijing is so paranoid about this?
Well, that's part of being a dictatorship, is being paranoid. But I think the US would like to see that leadership go. But we don't really have the ability to do that at the moment. What can we expect going forward? I think a lot of this talk that you're hearing about this is very triumphalist, and I'm suspicious of it. For me, the more important influence on how China's going to behave in the future is what's happened with Ukraine and the Western response, and the South China Sea and the complete lack of a Western response to that. So, and I think they'd be a lot more worried about being displaced if Trump were investing in 20 new shipyards and next generation manufacturing and approving ambassadors all over the world and so on and so forth. Venezuela is an act, it's not a strategy.
Okay, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much. Ronan Fu, Guermantes Lailari, and also Michael Turton online. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.